When we remember World War II, we remember the generals, the strategies, the maps filled with arrows, and the iconic photographs frozen in time. We remember victories and defeats, speeches and surrender documents. But history was not only written by those who commanded armies, it was written by those who stood close enough to hear fear in a soldier's voice and close enough to smell the smoke after the bombs fell. It was written by those who fought with words. They crossed oceans without weapons. They landed on hostile shores without armor. They stood in foxholes, on airfields, and inside burning cities, not to conquer, but to observe. Their mission was simple in theory and deadly in reality. Tell the world what war truly looked like before propaganda reshaped it, before memory softened it, before silence erased it. This is the story of the war correspondents of World War II, the men and women who followed armies into chaos with nothing but notebooks, cameras, and microphones, the ones who sent their final dispatch and sometimes never returned to send another.
In the 1930s and 1940s, war correspondence was not a structured profession. There were no safety briefings, no trauma counseling, no body armor. Most correspondents were civilians thrown into military life overnight. They wore press armbands instead of uniforms and carried pens instead of rifles. Their survival depended entirely on circumstance. To reach the front lines, journalists needed military accreditation. That approval granted access, but it came at a cost. Every report had to pass through censors. Locations were restricted. Casualty numbers were altered. Entire paragraphs vanished beneath black ink. The rules were unspoken but understood. Do not reveal troop movements. Do not describe defeats too honestly. Do not show the full cost of war too clearly. The public needed hope, not despair. Yet many correspondents refused to reduce war to slogans. They lived alongside soldiers for weeks or months at a time. They slept in mud-soaked trenches, in abandoned farmhouses, in bombed-out buildings that shook with every distant explosion. They marched when the soldiers marched and waited when the soldiers waited, knowing that boredom and terror were equally dangerous. Among them was a man who chose to ignore the grand scale of war entirely. His name was Ernie Pyle. Pyle did not write about generals or tactics. He wrote about privates and sergeants, about men who had been farmers, factory workers, and students before the war swallowed their lives. He noticed blistered feet, unshaven faces, and hands that shook as letters from home were folded and unfolded again.
He believed that the real story of war lived in small moments. A soldier sharing a cigarette, another staring silently at a photograph, someone laughing too loudly just to feel normal for a second. Pyle lived as the infantry lived. He carried the same dust on his clothes. He slept under the same cold skies. And because of that, his words carried an honesty that readers trusted. Across the United States, his columns were read by millions. Families gathered around newspapers searching for traces of their sons in his descriptions. For many Americans, Ernie Pyle became the human voice of a distant war. But war makes no exceptions. In April of 1945, on the small island of Shima near Okinawa, Pyle followed soldiers as they advanced cautiously across open ground. There was no warning. A sudden burst of Japanese machine gun fire cut him down instantly. There was no final article, no farewell message. He was buried near the battlefield, among the infantrymen he had spent years honoring with his words. In death, he remained where he believed he belonged. While some correspondents focused on soldiers, others focused on those caught beneath the machinery of war. One of the most relentless among them was Martha Gellhorn. War reporting was dominated by men, and Gellhorn was repeatedly told she did not belong at the front. She ignored them. She reported from civil wars, invasions, and refugee crises long before World War II reached its height. When she was denied official permission to land with Allied forces on D-Day, she refused to accept it. She disguised herself as a nurse, boarded a hospital ship, and hid for hours inside a bathroom as the invasion began. When the wounded were brought aboard, she moved among them, listening, watching, memorizing. And when the ship finally reached Normandy, she stepped onto French soil as one of the very first journalists to witness the invasion firsthand. Gellhorn did not celebrate victory. She wrote about villages reduced to rubble, about civilians fleeing with nothing but blankets, about children who no longer understood what peace meant. She believed that war was not an abstract clash of nations. War happened to individuals, one broken life at a time. As Allied armies pushed deeper into Europe, correspondents encountered scenes that defied comprehension. In 1945, journalists entered Nazi concentration camps alongside liberating troops. Nothing they had seen before prepared them for this. They walked through rows of barracks filled with skeletal survivors. They saw piles of bodies stacked like discarded objects. They smelled death lingering in the air long after the guards had fled. Many correspondents struggled to write at all. Some stared at blank pages for hours. Others wrote through tears, afraid that words would fail them. Yet they understood that silence was not an option. If these horrors were not documented, they could be denied. If they were not reported, they could be forgotten. Their dispatches forced the world to confront the truth of what had been done in the shadows. Once published, denial became impossible. Behind every report stood military censors, red pencils in hand. Sentences were altered, descriptions softened. Some accounts were delayed until the war's end. Correspondents learned to write between the lines, to imply what they were forbidden to state outright. It was a constant battle between honesty and survival. Too critical, and access was revoked. Too cautious, and the truth was lost. Despite the pressure, many journalists refused to turn war into spectacle. Their words shaped how civilians understood the conflict and how future generations would remember it.
But the cost was high. Some correspondents were killed by bombs that did not distinguish between soldiers and observers. Some were struck by sniper fire while standing too close to the truth. Others disappeared on roads that led nowhere. They received no medals, no military funerals, no statues in town squares. All that remained were unfinished notebooks, undeveloped film rolls, and stories that ended abruptly, mid-thought. Each loss was a voice erased, a perspective gone forever. Today, war reaches us instantly through screens, alerts, and endless footage. But speed has not replaced courage. The correspondence of World War II showed us that bearing witness is an act of bravery, that telling the truth, especially when it is unbearable, can be as dangerous as carrying a weapon. They reminded the world that behind every battlefield map are human lives, afraid, exhausted, and fragile. And sometimes the most powerful weapon in war is not a bomb or a bullet, but a pen held steady under fire. This was their last dispatch.